Hi first years. So today's lesson is all about functionalism and education. Slight change of plan and who's going to deliver what. So let me explain to you. So the first thing to say is that this week, hold on. So lesson one, this is me, and I'm going to talk you through these slides, and you need a booklet with them. I've got a little method starter. Obviously, you've done the mock, you all did really well. And we're going to start looking at functionalist theory. So last week we did all the introductory stuff that we usually do. Do you remember we looked at the different photos and started to annotate about what the actual purpose of education was? This week is all about functionalism. So we'll have a quick recap on functionalist theory in general, and then we'll think about functionalism and education. You could get a 35 marker asking you about functionalism and education. You'd need to weigh it up by looking at different theories. So this week's all about functionalism. Next week will be Marxism, which means that the week before May half term, we can actually write a 35 marker where we are comparing functionalism and Marxism. So this week is all about getting our heads around functionalism, exactly what they say, and the key theorists. I've also got some links to clips and some extra reading, which I'll show you kind of as I'm going along. And I'm going to voice over this stuff here. Now, Mel is going to make a second video, which will be really short because it's just explaining the task for it. So she's going to voice over explaining the activities. There's some stuff on Nearpod we're going to ask you to do because, functionalism comes up a lot. And we want to make sure that you really understand the key content. So that's a bit about knowledge assessment, really. Then we're going to ask you to write a 15 marker. Now, in all honesty, typically functionalism comes up as a 35 marker, but you can't write that until you've got another theory, and we want to get you writing as soon as possible. The 15 marker gets us to practice the structure and also to ensure that you understand the material really well. I've got some Marxism prep work ready for next week, so we can try and get back into the routine of doing a little bit preparation work in advance. If that doesn't happen, you can just do the Marxism prep work next week before you start the lesson, really, can't you? So just to remind you, this is the spec for education. Last lesson we did this first bullet point here, the role and function of education in contemporary society. Don't worry, because we're building on that all the way through when we start to look at the theory. So number one bullet point, we're kind of like halfway through. We're now going down to the bottom bullet point here, which is theoretical perspectives of education, and we're starting functionalist. Functionalism comes first on the list. It makes perfect sense. It's a theory that I've always taught first. Just refresh our memory over here. Education is worth 16% of your whole A-level grade. So the work we're doing now is the same weighting as the family. It is a bit harder than the family, probably, but you may find it a little bit more interesting as you're in education now. Now, before we get going on functionalism, I plan to have us a little starter with a methods quiz. Obviously, you've done your mocks and you've done all incredibly well in that, but what I'd like you to do now is to pause, jot on a bit of paper, a Google note, whatever, answers to these 10 questions, please. Okay, once you've done that, I want you to look through the next two slides and look at the answers and check you understand them. Structured questionnaires, comparable, reliable. I don't think there shouldn't be anything really that really throws you. The social profile, as you know, that's all the class, age, gender, ethnicity, so think age. Piece of research when the researcher went native. Remember that means adopting the norms and values of the group of people you're researching. Do you remember that time when Vengatesh, and I quote, couldn't help but get the boot in and actually joined in an attack? Sampling method, and I've purposely picked like a really specific sample group that you're trying to get hold of, and we thought volunteer or snowball, because how would you find this group otherwise? If you don't have a sampling frame, it's really hard to get people. Number 5, weaknesses of ethnographic research. It's all the stuff you'd expect. It's kind of going native, it's losing objectivity, it's not been able to record your data, it takes a long time, it seems to be around 7 years, seems to be your average. Two weaknesses of questionnaires. We know that people don't complete them. They're often poorly written. They don't access validity. Personal documents. Do you remember that was all your love letters, suicide notes, shopping lists, anything. Photographs. We didn't know if they were true. We couldn't understand it. Interpretivism. Always go Venkatesh. Positivism. Think Durkheim. Two problems with using content analysis: too many types of media outlets at the moment, particularly in a more global age where we've got lots of online material and different competing um, truths, I suppose, to be quite postmodern, different arguments and different methods of advising our information. You think about what's going on at the moment. If you lose yourself on the internet, you can find arguments saying it's caused by all manner of things. And it means that you can't really say the mass media says this because there's so many different strands of media that and they've all got competing views. Hard to analyse, quite difficult to categorise. And do you remember when we did content analysis and we had all the stuff like newspapers and things, we counted them up, and some of you were saying, I don't know if this goes in beauty or health, for example, and that's the whole point. It can be quite hard to research. So well done for the methods quiz. That was just to keep refreshing your memory. The methods exam's worth 20%, so we do keep coming back to it all the time. And next year, academic year, as second years, Mal and myself are like coming back to methods continually because it's straightforward, but it is really, really memory based. And if we can get it in your long-term memory, then we've won. So today's lesson is all about functionalism. I'd like you to pause this and on your booklet, start to write down what we already know. Okay, so hopefully you've written down concepts like consensus. Consensus simply means agreement. Functionalism is a positive theory. They believe that society functions really quite effectively and that the norms and values that we have established over a long period of time because they work. So please, thank you, nod your head, shake your head, how we queue, for example, all functions, and it helps really large numbers of people in the country rub along together with very little conflict because everybody knows the rules of behaviour. Um, Things like a value consensus, us all agreeing the same thing. If you remember rightly, I've mentioned that Durkheim particularly focuses on things like religion for giving us a value consensus. We all have a shared moral code, whether that comes from the five pillars of Islam, the Ten Commandments, the Dharma of Buddhism. Religion almost like gives us a view of the world, how we should behave, an ethical framework, norms, values, custom, etiquette. And if you have a faith, you probably find Durkheim really offensive, in fairness. But Durkheim is an atheist who likes the function of religion. Hopefully, you've got things like anime. Anime is the expression that Durkheim uses for a temporary state of normlessness. It's when we don't know how to behave. Um, you can probably think about the pandemic we're living through at the moment. There was a period, and perhaps still is, when people generally didn't know the rules and we weren't quite sure how to behave in public in terms of social distancing. It seems now that people are almost like falling into a little bit of a groove, that people know to cross over the road and thank people for, walking around them. And we've seemed to have moved through that state of anime, of not knowing how to behave, into a little bit of like the new norm. And obviously this will go, and we'll fall back into our normal custom. So functionalists focus on high levels of agreement, custom, tradition, and they've got no real concern with the traditional gender divide of labour. Think about the family, because they argue, well, it works. Actually, if women are predominantly homemakers, the expressive role, and if men are predominantly earners and the head of the household and disciplinarian, the instrumental role, everybody knows what to do. So they would argue that that like trad wives movement we've looked at, um, is better. Tradition is better. We all know the rules. And at any point where we know how to behave, things run smoothly, there is less crime, there is less deviance, and we avoid enemy. So I'm guessing you're already starting to think about education as being a really controlled environment. In fact, I mean, lots of commentators will say that. Um, as long as you never go to prison, which I'm sure you won't, school is the most controlled environment you will ever be in. You'll never be in an environment again where you have to ask to go to the toilet, to ask if you can take your jumper or blazer off, and be told no. It's a very odd environment, and they're almost like a little world in itself. Some people refer to that as a microcosm. So a microcosm just means like a little version. So, what do you think functionalists think about education? Well, I've given you a bit of a hint already about them believing it to be really wholly positive. It teaches us shared norms and values. We behave in the same way. The education works because it teaches us. I mean, Marxists would say brainwash, but functionalists would say it teaches us to behave. It's a really effective form of secondary socialisation. Now, I didn't delete this slide because we always do this, and Mal and myself asked our lovely second years who are sadly leaving us now, much too early, what they enjoyed, what they liked about the course, what tips would they give you. And one of the things they remember was making a bridge out of jelly babies and spaghetti. So I thought, well, I'll show you what we were going to do, and perhaps we can try it later. So usually what we do now is put you in little groups, give you some spaghetti and jelly babies or whatever, and say, right, build a bridge without really explaining why, and then we'd start to. So the bridge theory is this. Parsons, 1950s American functionalist, argued that the family is like a bridge. It takes us from our family, our primary socialisation, over to mainstream society. And education is this bridging process that gets us from being a child who parents make decisions to being an adult who makes decisions for ourselves and fits into society well. So the purpose of education is literally to get us from home to work. Um, Parsons talks also about how we're judged, but we'll get to that in a little bit how we get judged from very particularistic values, where your family might think you are the best, whatever, musician, through to universalistic standards where you're actually being tested by society, like exams and tests, pay rises, promotions, that type of thing. So education is a bridge. It gets us from being a child to an adult, and it teaches us the rules. And that can be literacy, numeracy, as much as please and thank you, and a respect for hierarchy. So the reason why education was so hot, your school was so strict on things like manners, how you spoke to the head teacher, the uniform you wore, literally just getting you ready. Because if you didn't have that period where you had to be polite to people you didn't like, when you went out to the world of work, you would struggle to interact with the boss, you'd struggle to hold down the job, you wouldn't necessarily be punctual or have good attendance or wear the right clothing. So education's a training ground. It's a bridge, it's a training ground, it's positive, it gets us ready. What's the problem? So these three photographs represent everything I've just discussed, really. It's norms, it's values, universalistic, particularistic, it's a bridging ground, and it's sometimes people refer to it again as this expression of microcosm. It lets us try things out. So if you were at little school and you were always, you didn't take turns, you always snatched, for example, children wouldn't have wanted to play with you. So little by little, we kind of like learn what's reasonable behaviour. The same as when you were getting older, years 9, 10, 11. If you interacted with your teachers in a more mature fashion, you got treated in a more mature fashion. And so little by little, year 11 or year 10 or year 9, whatever, became that little bit more sensible and a little bit more ready for the adult world. So functionalism and education. Remember I said this can be a 35 marker. So there are a number of things functionalists say about education, which we're going to be working through this week. Functionalists note there are 4 positives to education. Number 1, creating a social solidarity, making us think as one. And that can be things like team sports, history, citizenship, anything which make us feel part of a team. And that could be as like a team sport or like a shared historical, like Remembrance Sunday. Number two, teaching the skills necessary for work. If we didn't have education, we wouldn't be literate, we wouldn't be numerate. Um, how would we like put a car for an MOT or plumb a house or rewire a house or any of these really practical skills? So things now like BTECs and CTECs get us ready for work, but it could be things like biology, chemistry, ready for working in medicine, for example. Number three, teaching us core values. We all know who to stand up for on a bus. We know we'd stand up for people and give up our seat for people with physical disabilities, mobility problems caused by age or any vulnerability, pregnant women, someone struggling with a pushchair, a wheelchair. And we all know how to behave because we've all been taught the same way. And so education teaches us those core values: respect for older people, concern for the vulnerable, and so on. And again, it helps us rub along with each other and it prevents enemy. Number four, role allocation and meritocracy. This one's really interesting. It really means that the role of school is to sort and sift us into who does which job. So imagine like sifting flour. It literally works out who's going to do skilled work, who's going to do unskilled work. And think back to school, who was really good at drawing and now perhaps they're doing art. Who was really good, not so much at writing necessarily, but really, really practical. And now, I don't know, they'd like sign up to join the forces, for example, perhaps to work in engineering. So role allocation sorts and sifts us into piles. Some of us will be doctors, some of us will be the doctor's receptionist, some of us will clean in the doctor's surgery. And meritocracy, this key word, and it literally is I mean, if you draw a line down there, it means system of merit. So our society is based on who is the best. If we live in a meritocracy, those at the top deserve it. They're the brightest, the hardest working, and the best. And those at the bottom deserve it. They are either the least able or the least hardworking. So this slide is really important. Look at your booklet and make sure you're making notes quite clearly on this, please. So functionalism is really positive. I mean, that if you think about the number of desires you'd need in a 35 marker as being 4 to 5, there's 4 headings for your paragraphs there. So here is Durkheim. Pause this slide and have a look, read through, please. It basically is saying education helps us become the same. That's what this means. Okay, all of one type. Have a look at this clip and I will add it as a link when I put this on Classroom so that you can click and watch it. It's about 5 minutes and it's explaining social solidarity. Basically, social solidarity means we feel as if we're part of something bigger. And if we feel part of a community, we feel we're something bigger, we tend not to mess it up. So I don't know if you think about Portsmouth College. When we walk back safely together soon, I hope, you'll see there's very, very little graffiti. And at school, you might have remembered graffiti or people messing the toilets up and stuff. And sometimes it was almost like an up yours, don't want to be here. If you're going to college and you've chosen and you've passed an interview and you've got the right qualifications, you don't mess it up. We're part almost, it's social solidarity, part of a bigger team. Because you want to be there, you don't damage it. And think about university. If you're paying £9,000 odd a year to go for your lessons, you certainly don't vandalise it. So the idea being, if we can get society to be something good that we want to be part of, we won't damage it. And by damaging it, I mean things like antisocial behaviour, crime, deviance, enemy. So education creates social solidarity because we think we're all part of a bigger team. It helps us think that society is more important than the individual themselves. So often you refer to as groups, classes, not necessarily as individuals. And once we start to buy in that we're thinking about the school's reputation or the English department's results, we're really getting ready for society because we're really part like a little puzzle piece, aren't we? Of like a great big puzzle, and you just have to play your part. We work out what part you're going to play, cleaner or surgeon, and then teach you the rules to do it in this bridging process of education, and then you get on. You can pause and reflect here about whether school made you feel part of a community society. I mean, some schools even have the term community in the title, and they're really focused on having Christmas meals for older people, going into little schools and doing reading or whatever it might be. There's quite links between the school and wider society, and that's intentional. Because if you feel like you're part of a wider social team outside, again, it reduces crime, reduces deviance, and prevents enemy. So please pause this and have a look at these 3 photos and start to think about how this might give us a sense of solidarity and teamwork. Certainly down here, this one was just the sports stuff. I mean, think about why do kids train, or why do we have to wear a PE kit? Because actually, when you're little, at these kids' age, I mean, shorts and t-shirt be fine. Why does it have to be a logoed one? Durkheim would say it makes us feel part of something. And so when you get like a rugby team practicing when they're not competing, they still wear a team strip because they're all the same and it makes them feel they're on the same side. And that's exactly what schools and school uniforms are about. Team sports are really beneficial. I know I've said this before, but in a team sport, you have a role. You might be having a defence role. You might be, I don't know anything about sport, do I? It might be where you're the one trying to score the goal. It could be that you're in goal. I know that one. But you have to stick to the role you're given. If the goalie decides to go AWOL and go up the front and try and score a goal, goals will be let in because you're not there to protect it and you'll lose. And that's a lesson for society. If society says you're going to clean the doctor's surgery, you do that. You don't really have the option to change and to challenge. The same with gender roles. If you're born a boy, manage. If you're born a girl, be a homemaker. Down here again, we've got kind of championships, competitive sports. We're part of something bigger. We're working towards a common goal. And this photo is like the rock challenge. I mean, you could think of it as like drama, dance, whatever. But it basically is saying we all work as a team. So particularly things where you're synchronised, like dance, like this, you have a particular role. And if you're at the front, your role might be different to if you're the person at the back, and that's great. The idea is you learn your role in society. So as you can see, education is a real training ground to get us ready. So a picture like this, Durkheim would say, brilliant. Everyone's got a role. Everyone knows the position they have to play in this football team, and if they all stick to the rules, they win. But if they don't, if they decide to challenge and rock the boat and to threaten the role they've been allocated, that team will lose. And that's a life lesson, Durkheim would say. So social solidarity, we're all on the same team. We chant the same songs, we've got the same motto, we wear the same clothing. It's about being part of something bigger than ourselves. So, what subjects particularly would functionists like? Well, team sports like rugby, rather than individual sports, they wouldn't like things like, I don't know, long distance running as an individual. What's the point? Um, it might help you, but it doesn't help you learn your place in society. Things like citizenship, PSHE, or whatever you called it. Some schools call it PDL. It basically is where you learn your role. It's a bit just like an extended tutor, and it makes you feel that you're part of something bigger than yourself. Religious studies Durkheim would have praised, and remember the atheist Durkheim would have praised, because it teaches us a shared moral code. And Durkheim would have said, it doesn't matter what religion your country picks. Pick one or follow it and you'll all get on lovely. Less crime, less deviance, you can all follow a shared moral code. History is an really interesting one. Stuff like this, the British Royals, we learn about our history and we use that expression all the time. I remember on Sunday, we think about us and our, and we celebrate and we use those collective words, even though we haven't taken part in it at all. But by feeling that we are part of a shared history, there's less crime, there's less deviance. I mean, if you think about vandalism of a some type of remembrance, anything like names on the wall, like in Guildhall, by the Guildhall, anything like that would just seem absolutely morally abhorrent. And we've all learned that some things are more important, whether they're religious or whether they're part of our shared history, which we say is really key. And everyone knows to behave. It's almost like they are more important. So think about concepts like this. I mean, pause and have a read through. It's about learning your place, being part of a team, sharing a moral code. And Durkheim argues that society is enabled by school getting us ready. So school is a society in miniature. It is a microcosm. It gets us ready. And you can pause and start to jot down some ideas here. How did it get you ready? When you were doing things like paired work and shared work, was it just because that's how the lesson worked? Or was it intentionally trying to get you to be a good team player? I mean, at college, we tend to think about it in terms of employability. Can we get you ready for the wider world? If you don't go to university and you get a full-time job, are you ready? Do you have a good work ethic, punctuality? Are you grown up enough? Without sounding patronising, that's really what it is. Are you ready to fit into society seamlessly? Are you ready to be that puzzle piece, I suppose? And Durkheim would say that education does that. So you can think of some examples of how you get ready. Teamwork, even things like sex education or family planning or whatever your school called it, actually gets you ready. Things like food tech in year 7, when you thought about healthy food, was getting you ready to fit into society and to not be a burden, I mean, they would say. So you're healthy, well-rounded, physically well, think about PE, mentally well, think about PDL, um, tutor, school counselling and so on, and you're ready to fit in. It also teaches us the skills valuable to work. And for some of us, this might be very, very academic. If you're going to be a surgeon, you need lots and lots of very academic knowledge beforehand. If you're going to be a plumber, you need lots and lots of I mean, there's lots of theory to it, don't get me wrong, but lots of practical skills you need to do, as well as things like the softer skills, like interacting with people. If you run your own business and you're rude to all your customers, like you won't own a business for very long. So actually, education is about that soft set of skills, which is why teachers are often quite hot on like please and thank you and take in turn. Think about little school is actually getting us ready to fit in. And also, we specialise. So, if you look at this last point here, we all start off learning the same subjects, but later on, we specialise when we do GCSEs. So, if we were back in the classroom, your education's already a bit different to the person next to you. You did music, they did art. You did history, they did geography. And we specialise and specialise as we go ahead. So, we become more specialised through education. So, if you look at this image here, primary school when you did loads and loads of different things and you were always um, doing a variety of craft, history, art, cooking, PE, whatever. Then you picked the GCSEs, the ones that you excelled in, the ones you did better, and you thought, I'm going to ditch PE, ditch art, and I'm just going to stick to music, whatever you did. You became that little bit more specialised, and now most of you are doing the 3 A levels. So again, you've narrowed yourself down even further. And if you choose to do a degree in one thing, as in sociology rather than sociology and criminology, you become an expert like in one thing, which is why I've got no common sense because I know lots and lots about one particular thing. But the days of learning loads of different things are kind of gone. And education does that. It can be quite useful because I couldn't know all of these things in loads of detail. And to do my job, I need to know one thing in loads of detail. But I don't need to know lots of other things. Does that make sense? So basically, education helps us become really specialised. It makes us become experts. So if your parents have an electrician round, we might replace this with like BTECs and vocational qualifications, but she or he knows loads of stuff. They're really, really safe because that's what they need to do. That's their role in society. So this is Talcott Parsons now. So we thought a lot about Durkheim. We're now thinking a bit more about Parsons. Parsons argues education acts as the focal socialisation activity. So it teaches us how to fit into modern society. It's when we leave our family home and we go into secondary socialisation and start to get ready. You know, that bridge we keep talking about. Education is a thing that bridges us over to the world of work and being an adult. Um, in order to get us to cope in the wider world, we need education. Now, this is what I made reference to earlier, this particularistic standards versus universalistic standards. So your family may have thought that you were the best musician in the world because they were very particular. You were their only daughter or son, and you were the best pianist in the world. Yet, when you went out and you did your little exams, your grade 2, 3, 4, whatever you did, you failed it because you were judged by universalistic standards which are applicable to all. So it's not you um, being wonderful at home, it's you being judged in the wider world. And education is that. So your dad might think you've written the best sociology essay in the world, but we will leave up to Educast, the exam board, to decide. Because you'll go from being judged from particular standards just for your family to universal standards for the whole of society. And so education is just vital for getting us there. Now, this is their whole names, but let's just go Davis and Moore. Davis and Moore, so the third set of theorists we're thinking about today, we've done Durkheim, Parsons, now on Davis and Moore, believe that we live in a meritocratic society. So pause this slide now, please, and read through. Okay, so I know we've discussed meritocracy at length before. It's all about equal opportunities, it's neutral, it's objective and fair. We are all based on merit, and that's hard work and talent. If you are clever and hardworking, say Davis and Moore, you left school with all nines. If you were not clever and hardworking, you didn't. Now, obviously, probably the Marxist in you is thinking, but what about kids who've got private tutors? What about children in classes of 3 at private school? So it would be a very small class, but for A level, it wouldn't be unheard of, maybe. Surely they're going to do better, and is it fair? I mean, the concept of meritocracy, you could even replace this word with fairness. Society's fair, those at the top deserve it, those at the bottom deserve it. And Davis and Moore say education is utterly meritocratic. Every single one of you is having the same lesson right this second. If you do really well on this part of the course, it's because you work harder. So society and education is fair. Now, Michael Young is a more contemporary theorist, this book down here, The Rise of Meritocracy, who completely agrees. Society is fair, everybody has an equal chance of success. Now, this here is a link to an academic book, an article actually critiquing Young. This is really for those of you who, well, want to go a bit further, a bit deeper, should be all of you really, shouldn't it? So have a little read about what critics say about Young. Young argues that society is entirely meritocratic, so Young supports Davis and Moore. If you look down at this photo here, it's a really famous image where you've got children who obviously are very elite, very wealthy, versus children who are more working class. And the reason I've put this image here is just for us to really think, well, is society meritocratic? Is it actually the case that everyone has an equal chance? I mean, I know I keep coming back to this, but we're all being educated remotely. You've got people talking over the slides, trying to explain it to you, different tasks, you're doing exam work and getting it marked to exam standard. I think you're doing all right, for the circumstances. Some people won't get anything. If you don't have access to the internet, you have got zero. And that is actually not fair. Some people may have, perhaps their parents have got a PhD in sociology and they're home tutoring and they're come back at a massive advantage. Society probably isn't fair. And when Michael Young says that education is completely meritocratic, well, yeah, you're all sitting the same GCSE paper, but some of you are living in emergency accommodation with damp up the wall and are hungry and don't have a computer at home, and others of you have had a private tutor for the whole 2 years. So, is society meritocratic? It's really one, as I've put here, to be continued next week. Social stratification. So, a little bit less highbrow, but perfectly enjoyable. Let's go Harry Potter. We can all remember, hopefully, you've all seen this or read this, haven't you? The Sorting Hat. If not, I'll put the little clip at the bottom. It's a bit where the Sorting Hat goes on Harry and everyone else and decides which house they should go for, and it shouts Gryffindor and everyone cheers. Do you remember that bit? Well, education's a bit like that. So when you come to school, we work out what role you're going to have for life. Are you very practical and you're going to be a personal trainer? Are you more academic and you're going to be an IT programmer, whatever? So education is a sorting machine which allocates and shifts us into these different roles. And you can start to think about your time at school. How did education sort and sift you? Top, middle, bottom sets, prefects, um, people who have a reputation for being bad, a reputation for being good. People entered for the I mean, take French, for example, you can either do French GCSE or there's a vocational equivalent like a CTEC or BTEC or something without an exam. So what you did, it was your teacher sorting and sifting you ready for your wider world, whether you did double or triple science, for example. So let's think about the national curriculum particularly. I know I said last week the national curriculum is not so much, it's not written by members of parliament, but it's they're the ones who arranged the national curriculum to be written. It's a government initiative. Up until 1988, which again, we'll get onto this later, the Education Reform Act, teachers could teach what was interesting. I mean, they taught them to exams, to O levels, but in 1988, the national curriculum was born, as was GCSEs, league tables of results, SATs, and all that type of stuff. And part of the national curriculum was citizenship. Citizenship gets us ready to be active and responsible citizens. It teaches how to fit in. It teaches us to obey authority, maybe. It teaches us life skills. It might teach us about relationships, money info, and so on. Sometimes you have, like, I think Barclays Bank will run in courses. They'd come into schools and they'd teach us stuff about how to open a bank account, mortgages, and stuff. You probably had sex education nurses come in and talk about relationships and so on. You might have had religious speakers. It's all about getting us ready to be a citizen when we leave school. And functionists would say, absolutely amazing. It gets us ready to fit into society. Marxists would say, absolutely awful. It brainwashes us to be members of the proletariat who never question anything. So another subject functionists really favour are things like citizenship, because that's what the bridge is all about. It's about bridging us from home to the wider world. Now, I want us to think about what's good and what's bad about what you've learned today. So pause this. I'll put this link at the bottom on Classroom again. Or use a QR code for your phone, whatever you want to do. This is a really useful link. It's actually revision for the functionalist perspectives in education. I would 100% do this before you even start Mel's little video about the task. This is it. I've taught you all the knowledge you need. If you can evaluate it yourself, you've got it. You've got absolutely everything you need. I'm not going to give you lots of information here, because that would defeat the point if you're doing it. But strengths might be something like it does seem to evidence a value consensus. We do all act in a very similar manner. Think about how we're behaving at the moment in terms of this pandemic. We've really rapidly learned how to fit into society. We've learned custom etiquette, clapping the NHS on a Thursday, crossing over, letting people with mobility problems in front of you in the queue, for example. We've all learned how to fit in quite rapidly, and education does help us do that. Perhaps it is meritocratic. If you do work hard, if you're doing all of these tasks, you will do well at the A level. But there's not really a question about that. And if you don't, you probably won't. So there is a bit about meritocracy, surely. However, weaknesses, society can't be meritocratic and education can't be if people are receiving different levels of it and have got different resources. That would seem to indicate that meritocracy is perhaps at least not as completely straightforward as as someone like Michael Young would argue. Marxists are going to say it brainwashes us. Think about what would a feminist say? Is education completely gender neutral, or does it channel us into particular subjects, like boys into engineering, girls into hairdressing? Do we see more women cleaning and cooking food in the canteen than we do in managerial roles? What about ethnicity? Do we tend to role model? Do we tend to see Black, Asian, minority, ethnic community members heading schools, colleges, and universities? What are we really learning in the hidden curriculum? So, functionalism is really, really, really positive, and that's great. So, there's lots of strengths down here if you can have, but the weaknesses are probably going to be things like Marxists disagree because. Not meritocratic, brainwashing, that type of stuff. Feminists would disagree because reinforces patriarchy, reinforces traditional gender roles, and that type of thing. Okay. As a bit of a final thing for this, I want to watch this clip, and it probably will make you cry. In like a nice way. It's happy tears. It'd be fine. It's all about. Have you ever seen Educating Yorkshire? And it's about a young man in year 11 with a stutter which is almost debilitating, and he has to do the spoken bit of the English test, and he just aces it, and everyone's in tears, and it's wonderful. Obviously, it's a happy ending. I want to think about what would someone like Durkheim say. Would he think that's what education's for, getting you ready for the wider world? So if you can finish on that, please. Again, I'll put the link there. Obviously, you're going to do your tasks and things with Mal in lesson 2, but start to think about what you predict Marxists are going to say. We've hinted at it all the way along. If you had your crystal ball out, what would Marx say? He'd probably say load of rubbish, too simplistic. What about class? What about exploitation? There's some prep work here too. So Mal's going to look through some of this, but just to so you're really clear. Today's lesson, as I've said right up here at the very beginning, is watching these slides and completing this booklet. Okay, as I've said before, print it off, make a copy, write on it, whatever you do. At some point when we get back to college, we need to get this in your folder. If you haven't got a printer working at home or no paper, don't worry about it. We can do this when we get back. So we are using the slides and doing the booklet. There's your little Harry Potter clip ready to go. There's the Michael Young, The Rise of Meritocracy stuff for you to read. And the only task I want to talk to you about very briefly is the Marxism prep work. Okay. So for this lesson, please watch the slides, complete the booklet. If you have any time in this lesson, if that's how you're managing your workload, do your Marxism prep work. If not, go straight on to Mal stuff. Let me just show you through this quickly, if I may. So the prep work I've done, I've got you an article from an A-level sociology revision website. So this is absolutely your level, the content you need to know. And usually I'd print it off for you and say use a highlighter, pick out key names, annotate it. You can make a copy and do this. You can highlight things yourself, can't you? Look up here. Just highlight key terms. You can annotate it. You can add note. You can add comment like I'm doing here. So work your way through that. Marxism is harder, I won't lie. We'll do that next week. And then you've got one of these pictures that I like, and we've looked at this. What I would like you to do for your prep work is think, what would a Marxist say? I mean, awful, horrible, brainwashing, hierarchy. These are like the proletarians, all that type of stuff. So I've got you some ideas there. So you can draw arrows if you print it off, or just make some notes around it, whatever you want to do. Okay. So thank you for listening to this. Hopefully it helped. So use these slides, finish the booklet, watch the extra clips, do the extra reading. Mal will talk you through lesson 2. Okay. Right. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.